Okay, folks, I'm back again. Um, Today I'm going to offer you a little something different other than some of my music. Um, I started on a novel about 10 years ago. I still got a long ways to go, but it's a collection of short stories from the title of the novel, Elemental Monologues. And each short story has three elements in the story that don't appear to relate until you read the story. So I thought that I would start with this one. This wasn't the first one I wrote. This is a later one. It's relative to what's going on. We're at the anniversary again of NASA and the first landing of the man on the moon, July 20th, 1969, which I remember very well. Millions and millions of people all over the world watched it. We kind of take it for granted now. It was also just weeks away from Woodstock, and I guess it's not coincidental that I have a Woodstock poster behind me. And I love my country and patriotism, as you can tell by the American flag guitar on the wall, and I'm wearing my red, white, and blues. I love my country and patriotism. So I'm going to read you this story, and it's, as again I said, has three elements in it that don't relate until you read the story, and it's called Astronauts, Buicks, and Woodstock. And there will be more of these to come along the way. They're retro Americana, and I hope you enjoy it. It must have been the summer of 1966 when my parents and I flew to Texas to visit my sister Pam and other relatives. We had flown into Houston International and then caught a commuter to Hobby Field, where my uncle greeted us. He flew a Learjet for an oil company, and it was he who inspired me at the time to want to become a pilot. That dream never evolved, as I ended up wearing bifocals for a time in high school, and pilots then required near-perfect vision. I guess I'd have to settle for designing cars for General Motors, but that's another story. My cousins lived in the same neighborhood as the astronauts, as their housing development in Seabrook was very close to NASA's operation there. I never would have dreamed I would get the chance to meet not only Ed White and Neil Armstrong in person, but got to play with their children for a brief moment one hot afternoon in July. It was the highlight of the visit, though I would not tell my sister this. She was, in my mind, exiled to an army base with her new husband in the most barren, desolate part of West Texas, known as Killeen. I had to admit her bleached blonde hair was as big a surprise as meeting the astronauts. Like shooting oneself into space, it was the thing to do for brunettes in the 60s, as advertisements touted, "Gentlemen prefer blondes." It was only a few years earlier that she bribed me to iron her curly hair straight with the clothes iron, laying her head sideways on the ironing board. Ah, the things women do for men, the fads men create for women. I'll never figure out exactly which comes first or how such things derive as much importance as astronauts. My dad was shot out of his shoes and 3 feet off the ground when he was greeted at the door by a big-haired blonde. He had almost had his second heart attack while changing planes in the huge wagon wheel structure of Atlanta International Airport from the extremely long walk between departure gates, with only 15 minutes to change planes. I was afraid the sight of my sister would be his third and do him in. But he managed to calm down and made the best of it. After all, this was the firstborn girl in the family, the same one he helped buy a beautiful black and lipstick red interior 61 Buick convertible for high school graduation back in Pennsylvania. Sis and I used to go for drives in the middle of winter with the top down, covered up in heavy wool blankets and turning the heater all the way up on high. The radio was turned up too, and tuned to whatever station could be pulled in at night from far away. The station in our small town shut down early, so the choices, if we were able to pull them in on the dial, were usually Pittsburgh's KDKA or Chicago's WSUN. and Sis hoped for some Motown Supreme sound. But it didn't matter, as they could have played the Grand Ole Opry and we still would have had fun riding under the pitch-black night sky with the Milky Way ablaze like a Las Vegas we had never seen but only imagined, and shooting stars that looked like rocket afterburner that faded as they plunged to Earth. Dad was sure proud to find this car for Sis, and he'll never know the fond memories he helped create and the lasting bond that derived from those moments Sis and I shared in that big old black Buick convertible. But none of that mattered now. What once was a symbol of status and youth and starlit nights in the central Pennsylvania mountains now sat in the driveway of the private's house, looking worse for the wear now, covered in West Texas dust and slowly fading from the intense desert heat. It was as if he had given up on the car, just as he had given up on the military. He had put in for a medical discharge, claiming he could not handle the psychological stress the Army had appointed to him. It wasn't long after that my sister and her husband returned home for good. It was also the last time Sis would see our father, Ed, alive. It was only a brief year later, in 1967, the stars would go out for both my father, Ed, and astronaut Ed White. During a pre-launch test for Apollo 1, America would lose three of its finest, Ed White, Virgil Grissom, and Roger Chaffee. I take the liberty to include my father in that category of inspirational heroes also. Years earlier, when I had shared my interest in becoming a pilot, he had told me that even I could become an astronaut someday if I really wanted to. He believed in the American way and the ability of each individual to follow their dreams and reach for the stars. During the summer of Woodstock, 2 years later, Neil Armstrong would make a reach for the stars by being the first man to land on the moon during the Apollo 11 mission. Like the rest of the country that was united by television media, I hitched a ride to the moon that year, watching in amazement, along with millions of other earthbound citizens, man's first steps on the moon. I think my father was right there with me also as we watched the American flag posted into the lunar dust. Meanwhile, back on Earth, within days of each other, flags were burned in effigy as a protest against Vietnam. A few weeks later, that August of '69, the stars were out on the stage of Woodstock, and 500,000 young people came to see them. No one could have predicted back then that the first internet connection made that same summer of '69 would affect us all more than anyone could imagine. Certainly more than the stars of Woodstock or Apollo missions. But somehow the stars in the sky were never quite as bright after that, and I never rode in the convertible with Sis, with the top down in the middle of winter, the heater on high, and bundled in blankets, the radio blaring, ever again. That's my story, and I hope you enjoyed it. Look for more coming in the future from my novel, The Elemental Monologues. Thanks, and God bless.